Hello. Good morning, everyone. I am Suvidha Tripathi, representing Lens Inc. And I'll be delivering my presentation on a MUNCH, which is modeling unique and controllable heads. So the motion behind this work was to create visually realistic random heads that can actually aid the game artist or animators to quickly generate a visually realistic looking head and then work upon it so that it can reduce the manual efforts and also decrease the time it takes for them to generate let's say very fine grained textures. So we'll be working so we worked on generating both heads and the texture maps. So here's a video that tells you about, so we have generated this app that just with the one click of a button, you can generate a random head. So you can see the quality of each of these heads. And it's a full head. There is no, not just a facial part. You can use these generated heads as a preliminary asset for, let's say, chat assistant that can talk to you on your websites or on your apps. And there can be other use cases in animations and game development. We have also taken into account the demographics of each of these attributes. So we have a training data that encompasses male, females, several races and ethnicities, and also the age from young to old. So this paper actually addresses the challenge of achieving realism in 3D modeling, particularly in the, like I said, field of game art. But existing methods, they focus on developing or generating a high resolution geometry and visually realistic textures, but they lack control over the editing part or the next stage of editing, or maybe they lack control over the user demographic inputs. So for example, once this head is generated, let's say a game artist wants to change the texture color of the face or the head. So like within a certain ethnicity, there can be a different, there can be an interpolation between the colors. So with our method, we introduced a separate module or a second stage of editing, automatic editing, that can help you help you control the color of the texture. We have also introduced certain metrics that can help you evaluate or quantify the diversity, novelty, and uniqueness of each of these generated heads. So the goal is to obtain a 3D head generator that can be automatically generated. It is visually realistic, and it is also controllable by the artists. These are some of the examples, and this also shows kind of an overview of our approach. So from the training data set, so I'll introduce the training data set in the next slides. We generated the shape map and then use GAN to generate render maps, which is like the texture, albedo map, gloss map, specular. And then from those maps, we have again introduced a second stage of editing for the colors to generate a final rendered head. So you can see the visual quality of each of these heads. Now with some background from the previous works of literature. So there's been an advancement in the field but there are different approaches to generating heads, and the main three approaches are like linear shape modeling and non-linear shape modeling, so parametric and non-parametric. So some of you might know about the famous models like BFM and 3D that have done some pioneering work in generating heads using PCA and linear blend scanning or LBS methods. Then we have non-parametric 3D shape generation methods that use GANs or VAEs. So a simple VAEs are, for example, VAEs are extensively used for latent interpolation and reconstruction. So they can control the latent direction of each of the generated heads. So let's say they want to interpolate between the races or the genders. So VAEs are used for that. And similarly, GANs offer a non-linear approach to model variations in geometry and as well as textures. Then we found some gaps in the 3D shape generation. There were some limitations with each of these methods, and the key gaps encompassed diversity and novelty. So there was no metric that was introduced to actually evaluate how diverse their generated heads were. They were lacking control and entanglement. So for example, if the method is using GANs, then we know that if we don't have enough training data, it is impossible to actually get the control latent directions of each of these generated heads. And also due to low vertex points. So for example, Flame and BFM, they use only 5,000 vertex points to generate their heads, and these small points or these small number of vertices, they will eventually lack geometric details preservation. Then there is realism and quality that was lacking in each of these methods. So if you can visualize in the figure, there is in the first part A, you can see which is the vertex-based generation using neural 3D MM. You can see that there is less diversity between the generated heads. Again, with non-parametric methods like GANs, you can see the generated heads from TB, GAN, and ICT. They lack the diversity again. And also TB, GAN don't actually generate a full head. And again, there was a problem with linear generation methods like DECA and BFMs. Now with the training data, we obtained a training data set from 3D Scan Store, and we got these assets like head geometry, then albedo maps, normal maps, gloss maps, and specular map, along with eyebrows, eyelashes, tear ducts, and eyeballs, and teeth. So besides head geometry and albedo maps, we did not actually generated eyebrows and eyelashes and tear ducts, eyeballs, and teeth. We just use head geometry and these texture maps for our 3D head generation. And these other assets were used for final rendering later using any rendering platform. So our dataset comprised of total 104 meshes only. So you can see that we had very less dataset, and we had to work on only 104 meshes as a training and testing dataset. So the demographics include 50% males and 50% females. It was balanced in gender, but it was imbalanced with age and race demographics. Then the dataset was divided into 80:20 ratio for training and testing, respectively. Here are some examples from the training data. Now for the dataset generation part, so like I said, we had very limited number of meshes. So we wanted to train a generator or a GAN. We wanted a large amounts of training data. So for that purposes, we used PCA or linear generative method of PCA to generate 30,000 new meshes from 104 meshes and use that as a pseudo training set, and then like mapped these 3D generated heads to 2D shape maps. Now these shape maps will be further used to generate our texture maps, and then these texture maps will then be further processed for color editing. So the first module was shape generator. It was just a parametric model, PCA, and what we did with shape generator was that we calculated the offsets by offsets to each of the demography. So like for example, for a female, we calculated an offset. For a male, for interpolating to male, we calculated an offset, and similarly for all the races and age. And these offsets were then added to the mean head shape to interpolate between these demographics. So why we used linear modeling was because we found out that with non-linear generative processes like GANs and VAs to generate 3D shapes, we were not able to generate enough diversity between each of these shapes. The method was lacking with, it was overfitting, and there was mode collapse as well. There was not enough diversity and specificity between these generated heads. And we found that PCA was far better in modeling the diversity in these heads. The generated meshes then were linearly displaced, as I said, by the calculated offset, and the generated set of meshes were then converted into the shape maps. Then the module 2 was render maps generator, and in this we specifically focused on using a generator that was only conditioned on shape maps and not the input demographics. So for example, we were not explicitly giving, let's say, a female generated head or a female young and Caucasian head. We were not giving these as demographic inputs. We were just giving the shape maps after giving the inputs at the first module. So at the shape generator phase. And from these shape maps alone, we were able to generate the textures that looked like female, young and Caucasian head. So our shape generator was disentangled with the input demographics. So there were two goals to these shape generator module, render map module, and which was to achieve the realism and the plausibility. So to achieve high perceptual realism, we used multiple discriminators at different scales to downsample maybe twice and 2 times or 4 times each of these texture maps to make the model learn, or to make the model generalize well over all the resolutions. And so our approach was able to, at the end, infer even the high resolution texture maps to maintain the visual realism along with it. And plausibility, to maintain the plausibility, the synthesized render maps should be able to actually resemble the input demographics which were given at the first stage. And for that, we used an attribute classifier along with the GANs that can actually classify each of these texture maps into the ground truth demographics. Then the third is the color transformer module. So this was the highlight of our approach. And what we did is, after generating the texture maps, we tried to change the color of each of these texture maps. The objective was not to transfer the identity of the source albedo, and it was just to transfer the color component of the source albedo to the target albedo. And we used albedo for training our model, because albedos contains only the specific color component, and they don't contain the other features of the face like normals and speculars. So albedo was just enough to transfer the color component of the source albedo to the target albedo. And for that, we built a segmentation mask highlighting the salient regions of the face. So we were able to not just vary the color of the face, but we were able to also transfer the color of the eye, lips, eyebrows, and the tongue. So we created a segmentation map, and using that segmentation map containing the salient regions, we created a semantic color map. So this semantic color map contained only the mean color of the source albedo, and then using the GAN, we were able to transfer that color to the target albedo. So yeah, that was what I just said. So this was the whole method pipeline. So in that, you can see we input the 3D head and generated the shape map out of it. So shape map is just 3D to 2D mapping containing, so 3D vertices were interpolated as RGB values in the 2D space, and then each of these RGB values were plotted in the 2D space at the vertex locations of the UV map, described through the UV map. And then the triangles within these vertices were filled with the barycentric coordinates to create a shape map. And we used shape map to interpolate or to create texture maps, because this is easier for the CNN model to read. And we did not directly use the vertices. Now the shape map, after the shape generation part, we use the render maps generator with multiple losses. So a GAN specific loss. Then we used perceptual loss to maintain the perceptual realism of the texture maps, and the classifiers were used to maintain the demographic inputs. And after that, the color editing stage, which was done by the color transformer GCT. And here we can see, again, we're using the GAN-based architecture to actually transfer the color components. Now, these were to evaluate or to quantify our generated heads through the first module, which was the shape generator. We proposed these metrics. So we have seen the lack of these metrics in the previous literatures that actually do not quantify their generated heads, and that was what we observed when we evaluated each of these previous literatures against our work. So diversity is just a simple metric that calculates the difference between each of the generated heads by the model by simply using the pairwise Euclidean distance. Then specificity and also the diversity actually measures that your GANs or the generative methods or PCA methods are not suffering from mode collapse. Then specificity actually measures the difference between the real test data and the generated heads. And we use this matrix to quantify that our model is not overfitting. Like there is a difference between the heads generated, and it is also following the real distribution. That it is not like swaying away from the real distribution. It looks like a human head, but it is still different from the real test data. Then uniqueness. So uniqueness is it gives you the ratio of the generated heads that are different, And similarly, novelty, it gives you the ratio of the heads that are different from the real test data. So specificity alone cannot actually predict the cannot actually quantify the overfitting part. So we need a metric that gives you that this much percentage of meshes are different from the real data sets and still they are following the real distribution. So this was the comparison over quantitative metrics. So here we see that among the nonlinear generative methods, TB-GAN has the highest diversity, but it also has the highest specificity. That means TB-GAN was overfitting, and they did not quantify that the method is overfitting. Also, we see that there are other methods like BFM in generative linear models. BFM has higher diversity, and again, it has the higher specificity. So these methods actually were very good in creating diverse heads, but they were always overfitting. Then we also analyzed entanglement between our shape and render maps. So we directly conditioned, as I said, we directly conditioned our synthesis of all the render maps over the shape maps, and the attribute class. So we can see that it shows that our proposed method shows the entanglement between shape and render maps by analyzing the correlation between the specific user-defined demographic attributes such as race, age, and gender. And with the use of attribute classifier, it can accurately predict the ground truth demographics from the synthesized render maps. So there is an entanglement between the shape and the render map generator. And the disentanglement between geometry attributes. So due to the use of linear modeling, we were able to correctly identify the latent directions from one demography to other demography. So for example, from female to male, young to old, and from Asian ethnicity to African ethnicity. So linear modeling helps you in identifying the latent directions with the help of the offsets that we calculate. But with the nonlinear modeling, it gets difficult and it needs a lot of data to identify specific latent directions. Now, as I said that since our shape maps, render maps were solely conditioned on shape maps, to further validate our claim that that there is an entanglement between shape and render maps, we perform the ablation experiment by explicitly giving the demographic inputs. So if we give these demographic inputs, the shape generator gets the specific output along with the render maps generator. So these are the rendered comparisons. So synthesis AI and MetaHuman by Unreal Engine. So these are artistic created, manually created artistic examples. They don't use AI. Then these are the AI based models like TB-GAN, Flame, and Microsoft's Fake It Till You Make It. So there was the problem that we were unable to get the publicly available data sets of these methods, the real testing data of these methods. So it was a limitation while evaluating each of these methods. What we could only get was their open sourced models that they have displayed in their papers or in their GitHub repositories. And so this is the major limitation that we have faced while evaluating or comparing our method with others. And this is the highly visually realistic looking model. So in conclusion, our method outperforms prevailing state-of-the-art methods in terms of diversity and perceptual realism, both quantitatively and qualitatively. The color transformer component allows user to change semantic color in the final renders, such as editing lips, skin, eyebrows, and tongue colors. And the future work focuses on extending the method to model fine features like scars, marks, and face tattoos. Thank you.